Buying a new home in Powder Springs, Georgia, this is what you need to know first. So I have a few things in here. Do not make these mistakes. Could make your life miserable. Got a big bonus at the end of the video. But making a new home purchase in Powder Springs, Georgia, let's get right to it. Hello friends, and welcome to my Living in Atlanta, Georgia channel. If you're new to this channel, it's all about what it's really like to live in Atlanta, Georgia and surrounding areas. And if you're not new here, welcome back. I'm Dan Hilsman, I'm a real estate broker. We get so many calls from people reaching out to us about their move to Atlanta, Georgia and surrounding areas. We absolutely love it. You can get on a call with me too. Just give me a call, send me a text, an email, or schedule a Zoom call using the calendar link in the description below. However you want to get a hold of me, I've got your back when making a move to Atlanta, Georgia and surrounding areas. So number one is the timeline. On the new home construction, you're going to want to make sure throughout the entire process that you know the closing date timeline. They're going to give you a timeline in the beginning. There'll be a timeline that's going to go on the contract, but there's certain times throughout the process that either you or the agent that's representing you, hopefully you have a buyer's agent representing you. If you have questions on that, reach out to me, but get with your agent and have them confirm that the closing date's still on time. I mean, if you have a home to sell, if you have a lease that's going to end, if you don't have flexibility to stay where you are and the closing date changes, this could be a big problem. So let's look at some of those timelines that I suggest. You know, besides on the contract date, of course, they're going to tell you closing date, but then you're going to want the good time is that foundation pour. After the foundation's poured, just say, hey, we're still on track for our closing date. After the studs are up, after the home's up, when the drywall goes in, that's a good time to say, hey, we're still on track for the closing date. When the cabinets are in, that's great. They usually know at that point, cabinets, carpet, flooring, once that's in, great time to say, we're still on track for the closing date. And then a little bit after that, you'll want to ask to see if the CO's in, or if they look like they'll get the certificate of occupancy in time for your closing date. So these are super important that you don't have to do those timelines, but those are good landmarks, marking times of the process to ask about being on track for the closing date. Now, even the best plan and best case scenario, because sometimes supply chains, weather also is a big factor. Sometimes in new home construction is getting pushed back, but you'll also want to have, I highly recommend to have a plan B. So hopefully you won't have to use your plan B, but let's just say that right before closing or near the closing, they let you know you're not closing on time. For whatever reason, supply chains, weather, just whatever the case may be. What are you going to do? Do you have a family member you can stay with, a friend you can stay with? Can you extend your lease month to month? If you're on plan B, if you have a home to sell, maybe you can do a lease buyback. You're going to stay in a hotel? You're going to stay in an extended stay? What are you going to do? So you really want to have a plan B. So that's step one. Check on that timeline over and over again. And number two, have a good plan B just in case. Now let's look at step number three. Okay, so that was 1 and 2. 1 was the timeline, and the second was, do you have a plan B? Number 3 is, do you have a home to sell? So if you do have a home to sell and it's not under contract yet, you can get with your listing agent, or if you don't have a listing agent, you can be aware that you could probably put a lease back clause in there, and that you may be able to lease back your home from whoever's buying your home for a period of time. Doesn't always work, kind of depends on the buyer, but it's a great option to have. If you can pull that off, it'll make your timeline a whole lot easier to live with. And then another thing, step 4, things to consider is the rate lock. So if you're building new construction, you want to make sure that the lender and that you know that your rate is locked and for how long it's locked, and you want to continue to check that timeline that the rate's locked until with the closing date. The last thing you want to have happen is rates go up, your rate locked to expire, and then what do? You might not even still buy the home. You would have to pay off a car to qualify to buy the home. So even though you're qualified and your rate is locked, you're qualified for whatever rate that they qualified you on at the time with that lock. So if the lock expires, that could be a big problem. We don't want that to be a problem. So be aware of your rate lock. Now let's look at number 5. Okay, number 5 is more of one that buyers miss just from time to time, and it's super simple, but you want to make sure that your utilities are being switched over. And so the last thing you want to do is get to the house and not have utilities, or get to the house and the builder had them on for a certain period of time and you missed that date and you didn't have them transferred over your name. Well, if that did happen to you, you wouldn't like that at all. So just be aware that you have utility turn on deadlines. So number 6 is the school calendar dates and school registration dates. You don't want to, move it, think that you're moving into the property, your kids are getting that school. Sometimes there's a deadline for registration. So sometimes there's and you also want to be aware of the calendar, and the calendar changes if you're not already living in that school district, so you can so you can plan your life, plan your vacations, plan some time off, whatnot, things like that. But super important is the school registration date. I was talking to a gentleman last year, moved from California to Georgia, and he was aware that he had that date. He had to hurry up and make a decision because he needed to keep his kids in the school he was in or get them registered for the school that the kids were going to move into in Georgia. So super important. Now let's look at the next step. Okay, number 7 is you want to drive, if possible, you want to go to the neighborhood and the time of day that if you're going to work, if you're already have work, or if you know where that work's going to be, you want to go ahead and drive at the time that you'll make the commute to work. One reason for that is you don't want to go like on a Saturday or an evening and try and see how long it's going to take you to get to work. So I would actually advise, if possible, to go to the property at the time that you would go to work and drive to it. Drive to the work from that property. If you can't do that, get your agent to do it. Maybe a friend or a family member can do that for you. And just make sure you know what you're looking at on that timeline. I've had people before say, 50 minutes isn't a bad commute. Maybe it turned out to be an hour. And then after 3 or 4 months, then that hour is way longer than it was the first time they drove it. So just be aware that good idea is check on where you need to go, whether it's work or just whatever the case may be. If there's a place, church. So if your church is kind of far away, you might want to go ahead and make that drive. Make sure that your home is close enough to where you want to be with commute, and then factor in a little bit of extra time there because we are in Metro Atlanta and there's a lot of traffic. So now let's look at the bonus. On the bonus in buying a new home construction in Powder Springs, you want to be super careful and super aware of, Powder Springs is a little bit unique in that there's 2 different counties. So you would know what county the home is in, of course, and you would know the school district, but you want to check to make sure that the school district is not on a line or could be divided easily or moved easily to a different school district. So one school, we have really 2 high schools in particular in Cobb County are pretty sought after by parents, want their kids in one of those 2 schools, or maybe just one. So my advice there is, we had a rezoning scare a few years back for our kids. So we were kind of in between 2 high schools, and they were trying to change our zoning. And luckily, my neighborhood's about 400 plus houses. Number of houses is about a little bit over 400. So we did get together, and things going back and forth in the neighborhood, petitions being signed, and that did stop. But it was a scare because my son is an athlete. And it would have been a big deal if he had to change schools. Probably would have meant that we would have had to move. So that would have been a pretty costly mistake. So luckily for us, that did not happen to us. But you want to be aware that if you're super focused on a certain school within a certain school district, you want to check and not be too far away from that school on the line to where it looks like that school could be changed to a different school district anytime soon. So that's my bonus for you on that. If you need help with that or want more questions, I've lived it. I've helped lots of agents to make sure that they're in the right house, in the right neighborhood, in the right school district, and the looked strong possibility that would not change for them. So once again, I'm Dan Hilsman. I'm a real estate broker. Hope you enjoyed my video on things you need to know when buying a new home in Powder Springs. If you want to reach out to me, give me a call, text, an email, schedule a Zoom call on the calendar link below. However you want to get a hold of me, I've got your back when making a move to Powder Springs, Georgia.